Today I'm going to do a wrap up of the books that I read for #ReadSoulLit. I read 4 books for Black History Month, 3 of which I have here in physical copy and the other one was an audiobook. These are in the order that I read them in. First was Toni Morrison's A Mercy. It's set in slavery times, but in the north of America. Most slave narratives that I know of are set in the south, so this was a bit of a different perspective. I thought that the characters in this were both fascinating and really well written. This follows 3 women who are servants or slaves to this one slave owner. Probably the main character is Florence, and she is a black slave. And then there is Lena, who is Native American. And then there's Sorrow, whose background we don't know much about. She's described as enigmatic. All we do know is that she was rescued from a shipwreck. The dynamics between these 3 characters is what really makes this book. There's a real sense of hierarchy between them, and I felt really invested in all of their stories. I own a couple more of Morrison's books, which I'm looking forward to reading. I've got The Bluest Eye and Beloved. I gave this one a 4.5 star rating, and I think that it's one that I'd quite like to reread at some point as well. So next was Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. I know I mentioned how much I loved this cover in my wrap-up, but I can't help it. It's beautiful. It's one of these hardbacks without a dust jacket. It's got beautiful end papers that match in with the purple on there and the spine, and just everything is beautiful. There's also a little blurb in here about the design of this pattern, and it was designed by Lois Mailou Jones, who was a female African-American artist in the 20th century. According to this, she was a pioneer of the Harlem Renaissance and a celebrated textile designer, so this is one of her designs obviously, and that goes really well with the book itself because it was written during the Harlem Renaissance. I hadn't come across her work before, but I must look her up because I love this pattern so much, and I'd be really interested to see some of her other work. Anyway, onto the book itself. This is about a headstrong young woman called Janie and how she navigates her way through life as a young woman. It follows her through 3 different romantic relationships, and it also deals with how other people perceive her because of these relationships, and I found that really interesting. So this is about her search for love and how she doesn't get it quite right the first time, maybe not quite right the second time, and maybe not quite right the third time either, but she gets different things from each experience, and we see her development as a person. The writing in this is gorgeous. Hurston switches between the dialogue, which is written in the southern dialect, and that's written out phonetically, so you kind of have to read each word out in your head to get the sound of the accent. And the rest of the prose is very poetic. And these 2 elements you'd think would be really at odds, but they gel together beautifully in this. It's another one that I'd quite like to reread at some point as well. The third one was an audiobook, and this is the only one that I in general didn't like. I really liked the way it was written, and I loved the way it was narrated as well. It's by James Baldwin, so the writing was exquisite, and this was Go Tell It on the Mountain. I talked briefly in my last video about how the theme of religion gave this a very stifling feel. It felt very claustrophobic. There's this real conflict between the characters wanting to do what they want to do and have their own free will, and also the sense of them being judged for what they're doing, both by their god and by the other characters around them. There are also some very long preachy passages which fed into this as well. So the overall atmosphere of this novel is quite a claustrophobic one. What I will say though is that there was this passage towards the beginning of the novel where Baldwin is describing gospel singing, where the whole congregation is singing together, and it has such an uplifting feeling to it. It's incredibly evocative, and as I was listening to it I felt like I was actually in the room with all these characters singing. And that's simply done through Baldwin's writing. There is no audio track to this. There's no musical element to the actual audiobook. That's what I talk about when I say that Baldwin's writing was exquisite. So I will definitely be reading more of his work. And finally there was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is a real page turner. It's an incredibly compelling story. I felt very connected to these characters. The main character, Dana, is living in the 1970s until one day she feels a bit dizzy and suddenly finds herself in the 19th century and therefore in slavery times. As a black woman, this is very dangerous for her, so the whole novel has this sense of threat, and Butler really keeps you on your toes. The characters seem to be constantly doing things that undermine authority. That makes it quite a nerve-wracking read. Some really horrible things happen to characters who don't abide by the rules. There are some very violent scenes in this, as well as sexual assault, so just be wary of that. But this is such a great read. The writing wasn't spectacular in the same way as the other novels that I've talked about, but this story was the one that I found most compelling. I think you would like this if you've read the Outlander series or The Time Traveller's Wife and enjoyed those. This is kind of like that, but with more of a moral conscience. This is probably the one out of the four that is most universally readable as well. The language in this is really accessible, the story is easy to follow, but twists and turns and is really complex and interesting. So no excuses. Add this to your TBR today. Anyway, those were my picks for Read Soul Lit in the month of February. The hashtag is continuing on Twitter and Instagram, so if you want to talk about books by Black authors on there, then you can use that hashtag. Thank you, Dee Dee, for creating this challenge, and thanks to everyone else who's made videos and put things on Instagram and Twitter. I've got some great recommendations from the project, and I hope lots of other people have too. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!